My name is Trish Murphy with the Orlando Medical News, and today I'm with Brian Evander with Lowe and Evander PA. Brian, thank you so much for inviting me to your place today, but tell me a little bit about what you do.
Sure. Lowe and Evander PA is a full-service healthcare law firm, whether it's representing medical groups or physicians or even the staff at hospitals, whether it's in transactional agreements or the need for some sort of termination of employment and ensuring that post-termination obligations are met, whether it's in litigation or coordinating with governmental entities. If it's healthcare related, Lowe and Evander PA is prepared.
Wow, sounds like you guys have your handful sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
Brian, would a physician need an attorney to review a physician employment agreement?
The answer is almost always yes, both for the physician and for the hiring group. Too often, a physician will not read all the way through one of these physician employment agreements, let alone take it to legal counsel to have the attorney review it and discuss it with them to ensure that the doctor understands everything that they're agreeing to. It's the ounce of prevention now versus the pound of cure later. Without a thorough understanding of what they're agreeing to and what they're supposed to be getting from the agreement, there may be a dispute even years down the line that could have been resolved had it been addressed up front.
I see. So a little bit of maintenance now can solve or prevent a whole lot of trouble later. So how in depth does a physician employment agreement actually need to be?
It'll depend on the physician and the practice that the physician is joining, but typically a shorter physician employment agreement is not going to be able to adequately cover everything that needs to be contemplated and agreed to by the parties. More thorough, well thought out employment agreement is typically longer and addresses any number of scenarios that may come from the arrangement, including possibilities that aren't being considered seriously at the time that the agreement is executed. For instance, if a physician is agreeing to perform a certain number of on-call hours or rounds at a hospital nearby in a certain time period, and at some point the hiring group's relationship with that hospital changes, or a new facility opens closer than that hospital, and the hiring group wants the physician to begin doing their rounds there instead, does the contract contemplate the employer being able to unilaterally shift that and make the physician work at the new facility instead? Does the physician have a right to refuse? All of that needs to be spelled out in the contract. A general clause simply saying that the physician will perform rounds at that hospital is not preparing for the future.
Oh, I see. Are there any considerations that are often missed in these physician employment agreements that we shouldn't be?
Too many to list. A couple examples would be whether when one party has committed a breach of the agreement, the other party has to give them written notification of the breach. And following that, whether the breaching party, once given the written notice, is given any sort of opportunity to cure the breach, and if so, in what period of time. Another would be tail coverage. Tail coverage is a sort of extension on a physician's malpractice insurance policy, where after the policy has been canceled or has expired following the termination of the physician's employment with the group, a new claim arises and is reported by the insured physician. At that point, tail coverage would kick in. So when a physician leaves a group, often tail coverage is a requirement within the physician employment agreement. Whether it's the employer or the physician who pays for it is going to fall down to the contract. The contract will also specify the time frame that the tail coverage needs to cover. It should explain the deductibles and the amounts that the tail coverage policy needs to cover, and it should explain whether the party purchasing the tail coverage has to provide written proof of that coverage to the other party in the physician employment agreement.
So it sounds like there's a lot that really should be considered in these agreements.
Oh, without question.
Tell me, when do the duties of a physician end in the employment contract?
You'd think it'd be when the physician's employment ends, but a number of obligations under the employment agreement are likely to be what we call post-termination obligations. These are obligations from both the employer and the physician that are going to continue well beyond the termination of the physician's employment. One example would be patient notices. When the physician's leaving, is there going to be a letter sent out to let all the patients know that the doctor is leaving and where the doctor's going? There's going to be some sort of question if a patient calls in and asks where their doctor has gone. Is there a script that the employer should follow in advising the patient? As far as the patient records themselves, it's a question of the contract between the employer and the physician as to whose records those are. In the absence of anything in the agreement, it falls to statute, but the contract can control. Beyond that, there's probably the most prolific post-termination obligations, which are called restrictive covenants. This is going to be your non-competition provisions, your non-solicitations, your non-disparagements, your confidentiality and non-use provisions. And all of that's going to be dictated on a time frame, even up to 2 years in a lot of cases.
Wow. So that actually explains why these employment agreements are so important and why it's necessary to even have an attorney involved at the very beginning. So if a physician would like to make changes to their employment agreement, when's the best time to do that?
The ideal time, and often the only time to do that, is going to be before the physician has signed it. Once it's signed, it's locked in, and often under the terms of the agreement, it's locked in for a period of several years before it automatically renews or before the term ends. Prior to it being signed, the physician can take it to qualified healthcare counsel, have it reviewed and discussed, and identify any clauses that the physician will not want to agree to or will want renegotiated. And at that point, before the physician has signed, their bargaining power is the strongest.
So it sounds like due diligence at the beginning is very important. Earlier in our conversation, you mentioned non-competes. Can you tell me what those are and how they apply to a physician?
Sure. Non-competition provisions or non-competes are essentially restrictions on the physicians from practicing after they've left the group, and they limit the physician by both geographic range and temporal span. For instance, there may be a non-compete that says after leaving this group, the doctor will not practice in a similar specialty within 15 miles of any of the offices the physician practiced in while an employee of that group.
Okay.
And it may limit it for up to 2 years. Oftentimes you'll see some of these non-competes get a little ambitious and say that the physician is restricted for a period of 10 years. Court's not going to find that enforceable. The typical range in Florida I've seen is between 0 to 2 years.
I see. And you also mentioned non-solicitation. What is that and how does that apply to the physician?
Non-solicitation provisions are another form of restrictive covenants. In this case, restricting the party leaving the physician from interacting with or attempting to pull over individuals or even groups associated with the former employer. For instance, a physician leaving may be restricted from attempting to hire or hiring employees of the employing group while the physician was there. It may also restrict the physician from going after the group's referral sources. All of that's going to come down to what's defined in the agreement. For instance, if the agreement says that there will be no solicitation of employees or legitimate business interests should be defined in the contract and most likely would include referral sources.
I see. So Brian, you seem very knowledgeable in the field of healthcare law. So tell me about your experience and what you guys do here.
First, thank you. I've been doing healthcare law for just over 5 years. I have a little over 8 years of legal experience total. And my partner, Michael Lowe, has, I believe, over 20 years of experience, the majority of it in healthcare law. He's also board certified in healthcare law, which only several hundred attorneys in the state of Florida have.
Explain to me the difference between being board certified and then just passing the bar. What is that?
Sure. Passing the Florida bar qualifies an attorney to practice in the state of Florida general law. Board certifications essentially mark a specialty that an attorney has a proficiency in a certain area of law. To become a healthcare board certified attorney, You would need to have endorsements from multiple peers. You would need to take a several-day test. You'd need to demonstrate through completion of numerous continuing legal education classes in the field of healthcare prior to following your certification. And due to all of those standards, there are only several hundred attorneys in the state with board certification in healthcare law, and one of them is here at Lowen Evander, PA.
That's incredible. Now, Brian, do you guys practice only in Orlando, or do you cover a broader area?
We provide healthcare law services to physicians, group practices, and hospital staffs anywhere in the state of Florida.
Wow. Thank you, viewers and listeners, for joining us today, and thank you, Brian, for inviting me here to be with you. Remember, if you have any questions about healthcare law, give these guys a call.